joining us today. I'm Emma Nguyen, Head of Marketing Asia Pacific. We're delighted to welcome back Talane Miedaner to present today's Success Series webinar, Managing Up, How to Have an Effective Relationship with Your Boss. Talane is the founder of LifeCoach.com and she is an international best-selling author, speaker and coach. To view our upcoming events, jobs, career advice and blogs, please visit www.morganmckinley.com. I'd like to run through some housekeeping tips before we start. We'll be recording this webinar and it will be available on our YouTube channel by searching Morgan McKinley Recruitment, or please visit our website. You can join the webinar by connecting to the audio using your computer or laptop, microphone and speakers, or select Use Telephone after joining the webinar. Questions will be taken via the question or chat feature on your webinar control panel. We hope you enjoy the webinar and please join the conversation on Twitter at Morgan McKinley using hashtag Success Series and hashtag Career Ally. I'd like to tell you more about our very special presenter, Talane. As mentioned before, Talane is the owner and founder of LifeCoach.com. She is a successful author, speaker and master certified coach. She has also published 3 international bestsellers, including Coach Yourself to Success, The Secret Laws of Attraction, The Effortless Way to Get the Relationship You Want, and her latest book, Coach Yourself to a New Career. I'm now delighted to introduce you to Talane. Hello, Talane, and great to have you back.
Hi, great. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure. And I'm delighted that we have so many people signed up for this. What, over 1,000 people registered? So that's really great.
Yes.
There's obviously some need there for managing up. I'll just tell you briefly what I do. I own the company LifeCoach.com, and I've been coaching people now for 17 years and work with executives all around the world. And just very briefly, I'm going to tell you what coaching is in case some of you don't know about it, and that people usually use a coach to get from where they are to where they want to be. And that might be career-wise or personally as well. Sometimes people in career transitions kind of have got hit a midlife crisis perhaps, or thinking, well, how do I get my boss's job, or I don't want to do this anymore, I want to do something different. And that's where coaching can come in handy. So we help a lot of people make those transitions. Coaching is not consulting. You may not need to, a consultant usually is an expert in a particular field or area, and you hire them for their knowledge and expertise. Coaching is not necessarily therapy. Usually you work with a therapist if you have some unresolved issues from the past. It's most similar to sports coaching in that it's an encouraging, supportive, inspiring, and challenging relationship. So your coach will bring out more than you may think is possible. They'll bring out the best in you and challenge you to do more than you might, and think bigger and dream bigger, and help get you on the right track in life. Right? So that's all I'm going to say about coaching. We're going to dive right into this topic. I want to let you know your slide deck here is enormous, and this is part 1 of a 2-part webinar series. And my hope is that you'll come back for part 2 to learn more. I will not be able to cover all the slides in this deck because it's too long to do an hour. Plus, we got some really excellent questions ahead of time that we would certainly want to address for the people who have attended here. Because normally in a live seminar, I can just get people to raise hands and we can ask questions on the spot, but here it helps if you send them in. You will have the chance, of course, to type in your questions, and we will be taking breaks midway and at the end to try to get some more questions in as well. But we had a lot of questions up front, so I'm going to try to cover those too in the course of today's webinar. All right, so first a little bit about why manage up. You know, and a lot of times managing up is not something people think of doing. They think they're supposed to report to their manager, which of course you are, and we don't think of actually taking charge of our relationship with our managers or our bosses. And we kind of feel subservient, or like they're in charge of us. And we're not really seeing it usually from the perspective of, well, how can I manage my boss to better manage me? And that's really what we're going to work on, is giving you some communication skills and helping you take charge of your career and of your relationship with your boss and your colleagues as well. So you can use these communication skills that you're going to learn today with everybody. So why manage up? First of all, sometimes people don't have brilliant relationships with their managers, but even if you do, it's useful to consider managing up as a good strategy for getting ahead, and an effective one. A lot of people feel controlled by their boss or manager. Sometimes people feel that they have to work on weekends. They take their BlackBerries and their cell phones on vacations and still do work even when they're on holiday, or they're working late. So sometimes people feel that they have no life and that they're controlled, and so they need to kind of take back some control over their lives. And that's a good reason to learn how to better manage up. The other reason why right now this has always been a problem, but particularly with the economic stress that a lot of companies have been under, they have been using the fear of the recession, the economic situation, saying, well, you need to do this extra work because otherwise you won't have a job at all, and we've let go of this many people. So there's been a lot of stress on people, and they felt that they've had no control and that they've had to do double their normal workload because of the condition of the company and the recession and all that stuff. So bosses sometimes are using that, and sometimes unfairly taking advantage of their employees as well. So you don't want to be in that position. And then generally as well, a lot of people just feel underappreciated, overworked, and overloaded, and don't want to seem like they're not a team player. So they want to say yes to projects that come up, but also their boss may not really appreciate how much work they're already doing, and that this may not be possible for them to get this work all done in a timely fashion, certainly not with a normal work schedule. So the good news is that these things are curable in most cases, and sometimes not. Usually with a bit of some strategy and some communication tools, you can turn this thing around to a certain extent. And so I'm going to give you those tools today so that you can start taking charge of your own career and taking charge of your manager to an extent where you effectively empower your manager to better manage you the way you need to be managed so that you can do your best work for him or her. Right? Now, the other thing actually should probably be point 4 is a lot of people have mentioned, how do you get noticed without coming across as being braggy or, hey, look at me, I'm doing a great job. You also need to get recognition. You need to be valued and appreciated for the work that you do accomplish. And so how do you do that without seeming like you're tooting your own horn too loudly? So we're going to talk about that too. And help you get some control back that you may be missing. So that's what my mission is here today. So I hope that you're all game for that, and I'll do my best to give you some really good tools. Okay, where's the areas that we're going to address in the 2-part series? We're going to talk about how you can manage up and empower your boss. We're going to talk about how you can put in place healthy boundaries that will protect you from being overloaded and overworked, and from being taken advantage of or abused in any way, verbally or otherwise, in the office. Teamwork, we'll talk about how you can be a better team player. Personal balance, having some personal balance so that you're not working all the time, so that you don't actually take your BlackBerry with you on vacation or holidays. Self-management, how you can better manage yourself, regardless of what your manager is doing, so that you can succeed in your career and get ahead. And communication. We're going to talk about how to communicate more effectively in ways in which you can learn to speak and be heard, so that what you say people take notice of and actually act and do. As a coach, one of the things we have to do as a good coach should be able to tell a person, here's something that you need to get done this week, and leave them feeling really excited and motivated to do that, even if it's an icky task. So again, it's all communication skills, and you can learn to do this. Quality work, we'll look at, I'll give you a checklist on how you can make sure that you're doing the best quality work yourself so that you do get that notice as well, and taking initiative, and then creating your own career path. Again, lots of topics here, so I'm only going to introduce them to you, let you work on these kind of worksheets and checklists, and then come back with more questions for part 2. So we'll get you started this week. All right, it's a very ambitious agenda. We had a couple questions beforehand about the crazy, what do you do if your boss is crazy? And I collected all these questions and came up with, because this is such a hot topic for so many people, and literally people saying my boss is a narcissist or a control freak micromanager or just can't make a decision, has favorites in the office, either family members who are favorites who get better treatment or prior hires who are favorites. And then just the crazy maker boss who changes things at the last minute, even in front of senior management. And as I was coming up with new ideas and had so many new projects, and you get started on one project and then he says, oh, well, we're going to do it this way. I've got a better idea. Let's do it this way now. So you can never really get a sense of accomplishment because everything keeps changing so much. So there's all the different stuff. And I bet you guys could type in and send a few other names over of crazy bosses. And if we can see just, how many different crazy bosses are. So feel free to type in other sorts of, I've made a small list here, but feel free to add to that list and I'll expand it on the next webinar. So this is the reality. There's a lot of crazy bosses out there, and with different, as you can see, different styles. We'll talk a little bit about why, because before you can manage up, you have to know who you're dealing with, right? So, which one is yours, or is yours something else that's not on this list that you have to deal with? So that's a useful thing to take a look at first before we even figure out, let's figure out who we have to manage up first. Now, this sheet here is part of a computerized assessment that we use called it looks at people's behavioral styles. It's how people behave, basically how they act. And some people call it personality. Oh, that's his personality, or that's his style. But it's basically how other people would observe us. And in this assessment, this is sort of the cheat sheet that ends up in the middle, so I've pulled it right out. Because what it does, it shows you there's 4 areas of behavior. There's the first area here in the red column is dominance. This is the range of human behavior when people are responding to challenges and problems. So some people, when they are presented with a problem, tackle it head on, they thrive on a problem, they like a challenge. That would be above the line on the dominance. People who are faced with a conflict or an argument and kind of want to shy away from that or leave the room or want to avoid the conflict are below the line. So they would come down here. And we have this computerized test that tells you where you fall out in the shaded areas. So you see all these different shaded areas. This is just a sample one here. And you can see where your behavior, how people are perceiving your behavior, falls in these 4 areas. So we're looking at how people respond to challenges and problems here with dominance. In the influencing section, this is how people relate to other people and influence them to their point of view. And again, we can see the range of human behavior all the way up from effusive, which would be sort of your Bette Midler actress character, real bubbly, out there, warm, friendly. This person here is from inspiring. They're quite high up on the chart. Some people are just down here by trusting. Again, people fall all over the map here. And then below the line in influencing, this somebody's style who is a bit more reflective, just comes to the table not trusting people, needing to be won over. Your best salespeople usually are the high influencing people. They're warm, they're magnetic. Somebody like Bill Clinton, Tony Blair in England, he's a high I character, high influencing. Your D characters, your dominance characters, the high Ds would be somebody like Fidel Castro or Margaret Thatcher, driving, ambitious, pioneering. So those tend to be high in this section. People, again, are all over the map here. Now, steadiness is the pace of the environment, how people respond to the pace, and some people are really good at multitasking. They're usually below the line here, so they like a lot of variety, and they're sort of restless. And this is the kind of person who'll be having his own conversation, ironing, and watching TV at the same time. The people who are above the line are more resistant to change, more relaxed, steady, reliable people. These are your good, solid workhorses of the world who just plug away and get things done. And then we've got the people over here with compliance. And these are the people above the line like to follow rules and procedures. They like to have a system. They tend to be neat, systematic. These kind of characters would be like the character Spock in Star Trek. Analytical, logical. These are your engineers. They're systems people, your computer systems people. Your bookkeepers and accountants, you want them to be conventional, following the rules, not inventing new accounting procedures like they did at Enron. So these are the kinds of things you want to watch out for. Below the line on compliance, those are your rebels. These are the people who are rule breakers, red tape cutters. They don't even see the rules. If they don't think the rules apply to them, they can be all the way down to careless with details or even self-righteous, opinionated, opposite. But this would be your rebels. These revolutionaries would be the rule breakers, the ones who break the systems, who say, no, we don't have to do it this way. We're going to do it the other way. And those could be your rebels within a company who break through red tape, which is a good thing. But they can be quite stubborn as well. So again, we see that people are all over the map here in the range of human behavior. And now here's the interesting thing. Most bosses are here. They're in these 2. You have your warm and friendly bosses, and then you get your demanding, egotistical, driving, ambitious. People. Some bosses might just be, kind of milder and low key. But the characteristics of people who are responding to challenges and problems, these are your go-getters. They're determined. They're aggressive. They're competitive. They, will go for it, and they have this amazing thing. They can instill fear in other people, and that can be a good thing, but it's also scary to work for them. They like conflict. They'll go head-to-head with you in an argument. I think of 2 rams just locking horns and duking it out and, going for it. They'll go head-to-head in a battle and totally enjoy that. Whereas the low Ds are like, oh my gosh, they don't want any part of that conflict. And it's like, get me out of here. I don't want to be locking horns with you. You know, and so they're trying to dodge the conflict, and these guys are going for it, even creating fires just because they can get bored. They might create a fire just so they can have the fun of putting it out. So, but the good thing about the high Ds is that these are your pioneers. These are people who are usually good leaders. And take Fidel Castro, he was probably, you know, right up to demanding, definitely a high D. But as well, he had some influencing. He had some warmth to him. And people talked to him and said he's quite charming. So you can see that sometimes there's a combination. People are all over the map with a combination of these, and your shaded areas, which we can test for if you're curious about your own, will fall somewhere on this map generally. And I suppose there's the truly psychotics who might be off the charts, but this pretty much covers the normal range of behavior. So you can see now why bosses might seem crazy to you, and it's because they're in these two camps. Generally. And I'm not saying there can't be some high C bosses as well, the compliance ones as well. There can be bosses all over, but generally you'll see your managers are becoming successful either through a combination of decisiveness, because the people who are high Ds tend to be decisive, which is a good thing for a manager. If you looked at, I don't know, Jimmy Carter, one of our American presidents from ages ago, very indecisive. He was not an effective president. You do need to have some decision-making ability. And the lower Ds can be hesitant to make decisions or unsure, not the best quality for somebody who's going to be a manager or a leader. So with leadership comes a little bit of this psychosis, you know, this craziness. They're quick to anger, but the good thing about the high dominance characters is all they're quick to anger and can blow a fuse and be quite temperamental and have a sort of volatile personality. They also don't hold a grudge. So they might be quick, blow up, yell, you know, do something crazy, but then they'll forget about it. The next day it's completely over for them. It's like, oh, what's the deal? And you're terrified, and they've moved on. So they'll blow up, and they'll just be on and over with it. They're not going to hold a grudge. Whereas the low Ds tend to not be quick to anger. They're very, very slow burn. And the lower the D, the more slower the burn they are. They might never tell you that there was a problem and just, you know, they leave. I had one client who, one day she woke up and her husband wasn't there. He just took off, no note. That was it. And he was a low D, very unobtrusive, quiet, meek, mild fella, and just was not going to have a confrontation or a divorce. He just left. That was it. She never saw him again. So strange things. But that, again, would be a low D. The high D would say, oh, I'm not happy about this. Let's sort this out. You know, they tackle the problem head on. And they can also make the hard decisions. If you have to lay off 400 people in your department because the company's not doing well or that department's no longer needed, you need to have some sort of decisiveness and because I guess you could say strength of character, but it's a hard thing to do. And the people who are the high S's, the steadiness, these are your, you know, your nurses, your support people, your secretaries, your the workers. These are usually the people who are patient and calm, and your teachers who should be like this. Ideally, parents should have some nice steadiness to them. We aren't all, but you know, those are the kind of qualities that make for good listeners. The Ds are good talkers. These dominance characters are talkers. They're doers. They're fast-moving, and they light a fire. So good qualities, but everything comes with its pros and cons. The decisiveness is key. So that's why you see a lot of crazy bosses, is because they're over here on the behavioral scale. Some of them, if you're lucky, have some I in them, and they're the warm, friendly bosses. If they don't have any D, though, they might be indecisive. So if their D is down low and they're just the warm, friendly, and they've been successful by creating relationships and using their warmth and their influence to get ahead. So these are generally the popular people, the good salespeople. They like to schmooze and talk, and they can get ahead that way. So I'm not saying the other folks can't get ahead, but more often than not, this is where you see your leadership. And then when you bump into crazy bosses, that's because they're over here. So that can help you in terms of realizing, okay, you know, it's not personal. This is just how somebody's style is. They're probably not going to change. And if you bump into somebody who's really volatile and temperamental, don't be afraid to go head-to-head with them. Have a knockdown, drag-out fight with them. They love that. They will respect you for that. They won't take that at all personally. You can just go lock horns with them and duke it out and not be afraid of them, because they do come across as scary. And I've worked with a lot of clients who are executives who have this dominance in them, and they don't realize how much they scare other people. you know, they say, oh, what are you talking about? I'm a pussycat, you know, well, only on the inside, because you have this way of, you know, kind of chop, chop, let's go, and it can be a little scary. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. People need a fire lit under their bottoms on occasion. So, you know, hopefully you'll have a boss. The ideal bosses have some D in them for decision making, and then they're warm and friendly and use their influential skills. But, you know, we get people all over the map. Right, so that might help you, just seeing the range of human behavior here. You can kind of map out where you think you might fall on these areas, and then where you think your boss might be falling out, and that'll help you make some sense of this, I hope. I'll talk about the next two slides. I'm not going to go into depth on these because you can read them yourself, but the next two slides are about communicating with different styles of people. Now, one thing that really does work, for some reason, we like to be communicated to in our own personal style. So if you're that dominant character, or if you're the person who is the compliance, the high C people, the compliance, the spot characters who are dependent, neat, conservative, perfectionist, careful, and compliant, that would be on the other side. That would have been your, over here, the high C's in this section. Now, this is a low C person, but that would have been a high C person. Those people, they want you to have your facts and figures organized. So you need to go in there with your case presented, and that might be the 50-page, you know, here's the proof, here's the numbers. These are the kinds of people who will read consumer reports before they buy a refrigerator or a car and make sure they've done their research. So they'll have their facts in order, and they are really persuaded by the facts of things, not emotional. They don't like people who are messy and disorganized. That's not going to impress them. So knowing who you're dealing with can help you present. So if your boss is like this, you want to go in there with all your I's dotted and your T's crossed and your 20-page report backing up what you say. Otherwise, they're not going to take you seriously. Now, here's the person who's ambitious, forceful, decisive, and strong-willed. Those are your dominant characters. So with them, you can be very brief and to the point. They like the one-page summary with bullet points. They may want that support material behind it. They may never read it, but they want to know you've done it. And you can stick to business. You do not have to say, oh, how was your weekend? How's the wife? How are the kids? You can just skip that and say, oh, can we get right down to business? They love that. They don't actually want to talk about personal stuff. There's no need for them unless they're the influencing types. So don't talk about personal things. Go right in, stick to business. They're very results-oriented. So the dominants, the IDs are results-oriented. If you're talking to somebody who's the high S's, the steadiness with a slow and steady pace, they'll tend to speak more slowly. They'll be patient, predictable, and reliable. With them, you don't want to press them to make a quick decision. With the dominants, you can go right for the close. For example, if you're in a sales situation. With these folks, you're better off saying, hey, why don't you talk about it with your family, come back, think about it, and let me know. So you don't want to push them to make a decision. They don't like change, so they don't want to be pushed into change. You've got to prepare and condition them for change. So if your boss is sort of like the steady, relaxed type, again, don't surprise him or her. Come with, hey, here's something I'm thinking about. They like to think about things ahead of time. They don't want to have to make snap decisions. They want to think about it, talk about it, and they don't want to be pressed for quick decisions. Right? Then the person who's magnetic, enthusiastic, friendly, and demonstrative, those are your warm, friendly folks. They do say, yeah, how was your weekend? How's your family? How's the kids? That's absolutely correct. Do that with these folks and warm them up a little bit. They don't necessarily like to deal with the details and all the facts and figures and all the numbers and stuff, so they won't want to go into that, and they like being asked about their feelings. How do you feel about this? Right? So if you're boss, you can figure out which one of these categories they fall into and then approach them with the different, changing your communication style slightly. They'll feel more comfortable with you. And we tend to hire people who are like us because we like, if we're a high D dominant character, we like others who are like us. Same with the warm, friendly ones. They like warm and friendly people to hang around with. So it's a big hiring mistake because you actually need all different characters in a company to be successful. But it's those very differences that make us feel really annoyed by a person. So the different styles can clash, and we find them unpleasant to be around. But we actually, in a company, usually you need those engineering types, the detail-oriented who do the facts and figures. They talk about the space shuttle mission and why that blew up and failed. And one of the reasons they said it was full of these high I's, the high influencing people who were all saying, yeah, we can do it. And there weren't enough naysayers saying, well, wait a minute, well, have you checked this and you've checked that? There weren't enough people saying, well, this might not work, this might blow up. They kind of got rid of all those people and just wanted the optimistic, positive people who led them merrily over the cliff's edge. So it is good to have the kind of the more pessimistic folks around as well, because they can poke holes in your theory and show you where you're going to blow up down the road. So again, important to have everybody on the team. We just don't like everybody. So if you get over the fact that you don't need to like everybody, and you can just say, okay, I'm not going to worry about being liked or liking people. The high Ds are not particularly likable. They can be quite prickly characters, very curt and brusque in their communication style, often seen as cold and results-oriented. But it's not personal to them. They're just strictly results-oriented. That's why I say you can go right in and have a head-to-head with them. All right? So hopefully I'll give you more courage in dealing with your crazy bosses, and that you can do that. And I'm going to give you some more communication skills on how to do that gracefully, so you don't hopefully get fired. We had another question. I don't know if I should go into this again. On people who said, well, what do you do? So we talked a little bit about crazy bosses and how to manage them. If you know the communication style, again, you can adapt. We also have this just common problem with all bosses, them not necessarily being aware of what you're doing. I know this sounds crazy, and you think that your boss knows what you're doing. But if your boss is managing a couple of people, they're probably not completely up to speed on all that it is that you're doing. And it's your job to manage up and let them know what you're doing. And so you want to come across as a team player, so you want to say yes to projects, but at the same time you also have to manage your workload. So how do you do that? There's a couple of ways that work really, really well. And one is to have some sort of a visual wall chart. So if you're working in an office, you can actually put a big old wall calendar up and timeline out your projects that you're working on. So they're mapped out. Then when your boss comes to you and says, hey, Joe, I've got this new project for you doing blah, 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 you can say, oh, that sounds really great. I'm working, and you've shown the chart that here, I've got this one going on here, da, 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 and then he can see there's no space to put it in. It's like, where am I going to put this? And you can say, well, maybe we could, ask me which one of these projects should I put on hold if this one's got priority. And then the boss will say, yeah, okay, let's put that project on hold for you right now. See, now you're getting off the hook, so now at least you don't have to do two projects at once. This one's priority, so let's do that. Or he'll say, you know what, you're right, you've got too much going on. These are all important. Let me give this to so-and-so. Or you might suggest, maybe, Rebecca could handle this project or something. So you might be able to toss that out. But it's a nice way of reminding your boss of what you're doing, showing him your timeline, seeing that there's no time on there, without saying no. So he's like, yeah, that sounds really interesting. Let's see how we can fit this in. What's our priorities here? And so that's a nice way of doing it, and reminding your boss of what you're working on. Well, there's project A that I'm doing with so-and-so project, and we're up to here doing that right now. And then there's this project B that I'm working on with blah, 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 and this is where we are with that. And then I'm working on project C, and that's what, and this is where that one is, and I've got that mapped out to here. So it's really nice. So you can map out and show your boss and remind them that this is what you're working on. So they go, oh, wow, you really are busy. And that's great, because then they see how much you're doing. And they might say, well, that project's not very important, and this one's more important. And you might say, that's like, oh, yeah, this would be a great project. I'd love to do that. Can I hand this other project over to somebody else? And you show, you've got your wall chart there. Now, some people don't work in the same office, so you might need to have an online progress chart, which you can do. There's all sorts of software out there now with all sorts of great tools that you can do the exact same thing in an online chart and bring that up on your computer. And if you're talking by phone, you can bring that up and share your screen and show them, here's what we're working on, and send it over and talk it through with your boss. So again, helping them help you perhaps and say, well, you tell me what you think is, which project should I stop working on in order to take this one on. All right, so that's a nice way of keeping your workload managed and being able to say yes to some interesting projects if you can, have your boss say, well, can we pass this one on to somebody else then, or can we delegate that? Another way to do that is you could just make a list on a memo of all your current projects and the timelines that you're working on too. These charts are really good because they map it out, the projects plus the times that you've allotted to do that. The list is not quite as good, but whatever works for you guys. All right, so that's a nice way of being able to say yes and actually say no. Get your boss to say, no, actually you can't do this, you're doing too much. And that's a much better place to be in than saying, just, no, I've got too much work to do, I can't do that. Then, that's no good. Now, we did have a question that came in about being asked by senior management to take on a project that was within your abilities, and then, but wanting, but it would mess up your workload, and at the same time, though, wanting to get recognized. If senior management has a plum project for you to work on, you should bust butt, especially if you want to get noticed, just say yes to that, and then figure out a way to delegate and offload some of the less important projects. Because you want to get noticed and recognized. Saying yes to a key or plum or important project is going to help you be successful. Saying no to senior management is not a brilliant strategy for success. So you may work with them and say, yeah, I'd love to take this on. Help me figure out here the priorities here. Can we delegate some of these lesser projects to so-and-so or something else? Some of these other projects, maybe don't say lesser. All right? So that one, I almost laughed when I saw that. I said, yeah, say yes to the good, big, fat projects being offered by senior management. How else otherwise you're going to be seen as somebody who's not a team player, who's not willing to take on extra work and do something. Obviously, you do have a time limit, so you have to offload some of the other stuff. And even if you end up saying no because they look at it and say, actually, you're working on some really key stuff already, at least then senior management is now saying, yeah, Joe's really busy working on some really important projects. So that's come to his or her awareness now, and that's actually a good thing. So again, how to get noticed. Something else about, how do you toot your horn without looking like you're bragging? Interestingly, there's different strategies for men and women, and the strategies that men use don't work for women. Culturally, we're a little bit more comfortable with men tooting their own horns and saying, hey, look what I did. When a woman does that, we don't like it. We don't like women. It seems like bragging. So men can brag to a certain extent, and we smile and wink, and it's okay. But when a woman does it, it comes off all wrong. And it's because women it's a cultural thing about how women are supposed to be selfless, the mothers, the team players, they just give selflessly and, for the greater good. And so it's really hard for women to get up in front of a room and say, hey, I did this wonderful thing. It's going to end up coming across all wrong. So what you need to do, especially for women, and this helps for men too, you've got to be a little bit more subtle about it. And so if you want to say something, what you do is stand up in a meeting and say, I'd like to commend, so-and-so in the accounting department and, so-and-so in this department and that department, who all helped in creating this successful result of Project X. So you can talk about your project, and you're doing it by acknowledging all these people and saying the results that you've had, we've had fantastic results, and it was all down to the input of, now maybe you worked on this project all by yourself, but try to get some input. Say, yeah, I had input from so-and-so and from so-and-so and support from this. And then as a woman, that comes across all right because you're busy up there acknowledging other people, and that it comes across much better. So you can get recognition that this is the project we were working on, and but you're really giving credit to a lot of other people as well and standing up and doing that. So that works. You can do that, and it won't seem like bragging because you're talking about the support that you got from others who contributed to making this successful. So it seems nice. And that's the problem. Women in our cultures are usually raised to be nice and good, and men are raised to be right. So that's why men don't like to ask for directions. They're supposed to know everything, which is not true, but it's unfortunate. I mean, it's a cultural conditioning. And it's pretty much universal in most places. So here's another thing about speaking and being heard and getting noticed again for your ideas or your points. If you add numbers to what you're saying, it's much easier. You'll come across as being much more organized and thoughtful. So you might say, in order to increase the sales figures in this department, there's 3 things we need to do. 1, blah, 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 blah. And then people get discussing that. And then they get off track and say, well, blah, 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 blah. Somebody will chime up and say, well, what about number 2 and 3? And they'll come back to you. So without you having to interrupt, without you having to be kind of aggressive or in any way, the floor will come back to you because you use numbers. Very clever. So everything will come back to you. And they'll say, well, what about number 2 and 3? And then you say, well, number 2 is blah, blah, blah. And then they start talking about that, and then somebody will come back and say, well, what about number 3? So they'll keep coming back to you if you use numbers because people are curious. Well, what's number 2 and 3? So it's just a very clever and subtle and very very simple way to command the meeting. And basically you're in control of the meeting because people are going to keep coming back to you for more. So just put numbers in front of what you have to say. Plus you look really organized. And then we talked about giving the team credit publicly as a way to get noticed as well. So you can toot your own horn in the success of your team's accomplishments and your own individual competence simply by including the others. All right. At this point, I think we should take some, let me just see if I can whiz through. Do we have any questions that have come in, Emma, while I've been talking here about these that we've had on the table?
Yes, certainly, Talane.
Yeah,
definitely. So thanks, everybody, for sending your questions through. I have one actually from Shane, if we can take that question now, Talane. Shane asks, how do you interact with a boss who is only looking out for himself or herself? That is, will listen to what you have to say, but ultimately ignore you?
So how do you get your boss who listens but then ignores you?
Exactly.
Okay.
And proceed with their own approach. So I think
what was that last bit?
And proceed with their own approach.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the prerogative of the boss. So the question is, you come in, you present your idea, the boss listens, great idea, and then they do what they were going to do anyway. That is the prerogative of the boss. It really is. And you just need to keep coming up with better ideas. And if that is, even if they're wrong and your idea was better, because the boss is the boss, the final decision and the responsibility for the success or the failure rests on their shoulders. And so they have to go with whatever, they'll get all this input from their team potentially, but ultimately they're the ones who are going to make the final decision, and they're the ones who are going to be responsible for the success or the failure of that project. So your job is to, yes, give that input, and the boss is going to make the choice that they do, and it may or may not include what you've suggested. And that's fine. So I wouldn't worry about that. And if maybe your idea was better. A lot of times I see people more upset for the other reason. They give the idea, and then the boss takes it and pretends it's his idea or her idea and doesn't give you any credit, and they just say, oh, I had this great idea. Again, that's the boss's prerogative. So there are some prerogatives that come with being the boss, and that's one of them is that you get to choose what to do. You're the ultimate decision maker. Now you're going to, you're going to either fail with that or not, and your team is to give you input and ideas, but you obviously can't. There'll probably be a lot of different input and ideas, and ultimately you have to choose amongst your team ideas which way to go forward. Somebody's not going to have to make that decision, and it's usually the boss who does that, and that is their job. That is their job. So in a sense, you don't have cause for complaint. Just carry on. You're doing fine. Give your ideas. And again, usually people are more upset that the boss uses ideas and then doesn't say, hey, but John gave me that idea. But again, that is completely within their prerogative. They're allowed to take credit for what you do. They're allowed to take your ideas and use them. And in fact, legally. So if you've come up with a great invention, that company owns your invention. You are not going to be able to take that invention and make money on it privately. If you did it on company time, they own it. And that's legal, and that's how it works. That's what you sign up for. If you want to work for yourself, that's a different ballgame. Then you're in charge, and you get to make the decisions, and you get to make the choices. But if you work for somebody else, if you work for a company, any brilliant ideas you have, they own them, and they have every right to. So just let go of that. That's the prerogative of the boss. That's what comes with being the boss. That's how it's supposed to be. Start coming, and again, carry on. Keep suggesting things because that's your role as the employee to come up with some good ideas. And hopefully you'll get an idea that the boss thinks is, a good one to go with. But they may not. So, but you're doing the best you can. That's it. Don't take it personally. Don't worry about it. Good question. Any others out there, Emma?
Yes, we've got another one from Nicola, actually, from Ireland. She asked, my manager only communicates with me via email. I regularly suggest face-to-face meetings, but he wants everything in email for his records. Are there any suggestions?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Again, going back to different styles, people have lived different learning styles, and this is one of the interesting things about being a coach is you find out all sorts of things with these computerized assessments that we use and the tests we use on people. Some people they take in information orally, so they like to hear things. So they like to talk by phone, they like to have in-person meetings, and they retain they have a good memory for things that they hear. Some people find it's much easier to do things by writing, and they have a very good memory for things that they've read. So they're easier for them. It's easier to remember a conversation if they've read it as opposed to heard it. And these are hardwired brain abilities. And so you'll see, one gal who was in law school when I was at Georgetown, she had a very good oral memory. So she could remember what the professor said word for word. But she had a terrible verbal or written memory. So if she was reading textbooks, she couldn't do it. So what she ended up doing to get through law school, which she did with flying colors, she read aloud all of her textbooks because she would remember herself reading it. She could hear it and remember it. If she'd read them just visually, she had no visual memory. So it's very, people have very different brains. It's my guess is your boss wants everything in writing because he or she remembers what they read. And it's easier for them to take in information that way and digest it. They probably have a very poor tonal memory and don't really remember what they hear very well. So again, boss's prerogative, make it easier for boss. If your boss wants things in writing, great. If your boss wants things verbally, do it verbally. Now, the best, for example, speakers and presenters recognize that people have different learning styles, and they try to do all three. So a really good manager who's leading a meeting would have visual aids, so written stuff. They would have oral aids, so they talk about things, and then have people move around because there's kinesthetic or learning by movement. Some people remember things best if they talk and walk at the same time. It's like having a walking meeting is now becoming a little bit more popular because a lot of people have kinesthetic memories. Again, not something we usually do. We sit down usually in a meeting. But for some people, it's easier to remember what happened and recall the details of the meetings if they've been walking around or standing up even. So you'll see those people will often be tapping their heels, tapping their fingers. They're trying to move. It's not that they're impatient. It's that they're using the movement to help them remember what's happening. And they have kinesthetic memory. So in this case, again, managing up is for communicating to your boss in the style that he or she most feels comfortable with. You may not feel comfortable with it. You may need to supplement that and say maybe you have a better oral memory. You might say, hey, look, I'm sent you this memo. I'm going to just call you up and talk you through it. Or you might need your boss, you might need to say to your boss, look, I need you to actually talk me through this, because it's easier for you to work that way. And to me, for me to really get what you say, I want to not only read it, but I want to hear it from you. Or you might find that you just need to read aloud the stuff that comes from him so that it goes into your own oral memory. Again, people have very different learning styles, and how they operate is often an indication of what they feel comfortable with. That would be my guess. Obviously, I don't know your boss, but just from his behavior, that's what I would suspect. Good questions. Anything else out there? Should I carry on a little bit more?
Yeah, let's do that, Talane, and then there's a couple more questions we'll take after your presentation.
Yeah, because we've got a few more minutes, and I want to introduce some of the other slides to you as well so you guys can have this checklist to take home with you. I promised you some communication skills on how to speak and be heard. And one of the simplest techniques that you can use to be better heard and have your ideas adopted in the workplace, and this might help the guy who's presenting ideas and then they're not getting accepted. If you want people to really hear you, start deleting I from your vocabulary. This is much harder than it sounds. So for example, if you're in a meeting and you have an idea about something or even a question about something, I hear people say something like, oh, I have a question about blah, blah, blah. Can you explain? Just delete that. Just say, can you develop that point more for me, number 2? Expand on that. Can you clarify number 2 that you were talking about? So you could just do it like that. Take I out of it. And especially, the question's not such a big deal, but you don't want to highlight your ignorance in a sense. So taking the I out of it, again, helps not highlight that you didn't know something. The other reason you take the I out is if you're saying something. So let's take the example of, I think we could increase sales by 50% if we did X, Y, and Z. So you should say number 1, number 2, and number 3. People can remember about 3 things. So hopefully try to get your points to 3 if you can. I think is your opinion. And as much as people might like you or not, it's still just one person's opinion. Now, take I out of this and read it again and say it again, and it comes across like this. Sales will increase by 50% if we do 1, 2, and 3. Just deliver it as a statement of fact. even your compliments. Oh, I really like your sweater. I think that looks nice. You could change it to, great sweater. You have an amazing sense of style. No I in it. Suddenly it becomes a universal truth. It's not just one person's opinion. As coaches, we do this all the time. Instead of saying, oh, I think you're terrific, we say, you are terrific. Oh, I think you did a really good job leading that meeting. You did a brilliant job leading that meeting. You're a born leader. Much better, bigger. It's hard for people to argue with that when it's a universal truth. So simply by removing I, suddenly people might start acting on what you say. Plus, if you add numbers to it, it's even more compelling. The other thing is the voice of power. You can say almost anything to anybody if you use a neutral tone of voice. So it's like the sky is blue. It's just a fact. Sales will increase by 20% if we do this. Just state it like a fact. No excitement, no righteousness. You don't have to be enthusiastic. Just neutral tone of voice. People can hear the neutral tone of voice. If you get too high pitch, especially for women whose voices, when they get excited or upset, their voices go up. And the moment their voices go up, men tune them out. They don't listen. They stop listening. Sad, but true. So I had one client who was negotiating her raise, her salary increase, by phone, because she was working virtually, and her manager, she hardly ever saw her manager, so her salary increased. She had to negotiate by phone. She was talking to him about her accomplishments and what she was doing, and he's saying, well, she wasn't going well. She started to get excited. Her voice was going up. She was getting a little bit angry. She could hear her. She was losing that control. She lost the voice of power. She said, look, let me just call you back in a minute. She calmed herself down, counted to 10, focused on what points she wanted to make about her performance, got back on the phone, called him back up, and said, boom, 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 neutral tone of voice. She got her raise. And she said it would never have happened. She knew she was losing it because she was getting upset. And she just get back into that neutral tone of voice. So especially for women, men as well, though, of course, if you're starting to shout or yell, or it's good to have that neutral tone of voice. It's just very powerful. So there you go, some quick little tips, and then, of course, add numbers. So if you can do those three things, I'm just giving you a few little tips. We have many, many more coaching skills and techniques that we can give. But to start with this week, practice just not saying I. Even with compliments, with acknowledgments for people, that's a big step forward for a lot of people. And start adding numbers to what you say. I had one female executive who just did those two things, and she got promoted and broke through the glass ceiling. Pretty cool. All right. This checklist I want to introduce to you, and then we'll take some more questions. The next couple of slides are really checklists, and they're just going to see how well are you managing up and get you to start thinking about things. So I empower my manager to manage me well. Well, have you told your boss? See, the other thing about people, you've seen that style chart that people need different things from different. Some people, the high compliance people, the high C's, like the details. They like structure, and they need a structure to function well in. And they like instructions. They want clear, very clear and specific instructions to do their work. And so you need to tell your boss, look, to do my best work, I need clear instructions. And your boss says, well, just do this, this, and that. Then you go and write it up and what you think you understood and present it back to your boss and say, from what you've said, this is what I understand my task is. And you give that and go over that with them and say, I'm supposed to do this, this, and this. You might need to create your own structure for it if your boss is kind of a loose. Often the high I's are the influencing people are a bit loose and don't necessarily want to focus on the details. And the high C's really need those details and need that structure. So you're going to need to let your boss know that. Alternatively, there's some people who would consider that micromanaging. They want to just figure it out themselves. They want very free reign. So you need to let your boss know that and say, look, I do my best work when I've given plenty of free reign, and you just tell me what to do and I'll get on it. And if I have a problem, if I get stuck with anything, I will immediately let you know. Or in some managers who are real micromanagers, they might want regular feedback. I'll call you the moment there's a problem, and I'll give you a weekly report, and we'll discuss it by phone. So there's that. Any bad news, let your boss know right away. Keep your manager fully informed as soon as there's something bad. Don't try to let it get worse. Better to report in immediately. So you'll see a lot of these are about communication. I make strong requests to my managers so I can produce well. This is what I need from you. This is my request. I request blah, 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 so that I can do my best job here. I need these tools. I need this. Make strong requests. Make big requests. that challenge them to provide you the tools that you need for your job. Immediately give your managers problems that you cannot solve, so they can trust you then. Say, okay, here, that you're not trying to bury some problems. Put yourself in your manager's shoes, manage from there. Stay in full communication with your manager no matter what happens. So find a way. Send them emails if they're on the road. Let them know what's going on. Send them a report. By managing up, I used to work at Chase Manhattan Bank in New York and managed a financial center, and my manager was kind of like an old-fashioned traditional manager, very controlling and very micromanaging, and I don't like that. I like the free reign. I don't want structure. And so I really resisted it and didn't want to fill out all these reports and stuff. And when I turned things around and thought, okay, I'm not only going to turn in a one-page report, I'm going to write a 5-page report and send it to her. Then I'm going to call her up, and I'm going to go through that report with her in detail. And I kept doing that. And finally, after a couple of weeks of doing that, she said, okay, Talane, she started to trust me. It's because I'm over-fulfilling her need to be in control, which she had a need to be in control. She said, okay, Talane, enough. I just need a one-page bullet point summary, and you don't have to call me up and go over it unless I have a question about it. I'll call you. And suddenly I was free. So sometimes if you can figure out what your manager needs, if they're a control freak, they need to feel in control. So you need to provide that for them. And a good employee will manage up by sensing what their boss actually needs and satisfying that need so that effectively it then disappears. Whereas if you try to resist it, whatever we resist ends up persisting, then they become more controlling and more trying to get a hold of you, and you get more and more resentful. It's a funny thing. It's psychological because when you take charge of it, you feel more in control. All right. So these are checklists. And I said we're going to talk about more of these again in the next part 2 piece, some of this checklist, but critical to have healthy boundaries with your boss. A quick story on that one. I had a client who worked at AT&T as an executive in New York, and her manager was always wanting to have meetings on a Sunday and would think nothing of calling her after 9 p.m. at night. Now, she didn't have children, but she had her partner, and she valued her private time and didn't really like having calls at 9 o'clock at night, and certainly didn't like coming in on a Sunday to prepare for some meeting with the CEO on a Monday, which he thought was perfectly normal to do. And so she had to put in place some boundaries and say, look, it's not okay. I consider any time in the evening to be my private time, and I'm happy to come in the morning and discuss this with you tomorrow morning. So she had to inform in a neutral tone of voice, and we have a communication model, a 4-step communication model that you can use to inform people when they've done something. Basically, I'm sure you're not aware, but it's 9 o'clock at night, and I don't take work calls at night. This is my private time. So you can put in place some boundaries. Now, ideally, you've done that before you got hired, but she didn't, and she had a new boss, and so she had to kind of train her boss, no, that's actually not okay with me. I'll be happy to talk about this with you tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp. And same for the Sunday morning meetings. Everybody was too cowardly to say anything, and she's the only one who said that and said, no, the weekends are private times, and Sunday's my sacred day, and I'm not willing to do that. I'm willing to stay late on a Friday night if we need to, but I'm not willing to do that on a Sunday morning. And if we plan for this, we should be able to get this all done on Friday so that we can relax over the weekend. So she was the only one who had the courage to make this bold request of her boss and say, no, don't want to do that. The rest of the staff was so delighted because nobody else had any courage to do that, and nobody wanted to come in on a Sunday. It's one thing if it's the one-off thing, but to do it on a regular basis, that's a bit much. All right, teamwork checklist. You can check this out and see how many points you get on this one. Are you really a good team player as you think you are? Personal balance checklist. You can tick these through and see which one of these are true for you, and tick them as true or false if you have them or not. There's a self-management checklist as well, communication checklist, quality work checklist, take initiative checklist, career path checklist, and now we're back to the books. So I want you to take these checklists that I've given you, and you can print them off, and take them and write down whether they're true or false for you. Are you well connected to those who can advance you? Yes or no? And then you'll start to see where some work needs to be done. And you also might have some questions that you can bring back to part 2 as we go through some of these checklists. And you say, well, how do I get this pointer? How do I get this one? I don't see how to do that. But this will get you thinking about how you can be a better employee as well, one who gets noticed, one who gets promoted, one who gets raises, and really taking charge of your own career. Now, my guess is at this point that we have a few more questions, and I think we have time to take some of the others that might have come in.
Yeah, we sure do, Talane. We have a question from Jill, and she has a really interesting one. My issue is trying to manage two bosses who are opposite types. This creates a very volatile and emotional environment, and the bosses who are opposite types, one is she doesn't really know, what she's getting that day. So one boss is dependent, neat, conservative, and her boss is very forceful, strong, and strong-willed. So any thoughts on that, Talane?
Well, actually, that's interesting because those two styles actually get along pretty well. They're both results-oriented. So you've got your high dominance character is going to be your kind of more aggressive, dominant, the sort of Margaret Thatcher type. And then you've got your high C type, more cautious, more neat, dependent, conservative. But they're both results-oriented. And both of those types don't really want to talk about the personal stuff. Yes, they're not going to want to talk about the kids, the family, the weekend. You can go right to business with them. So they both have results-oriented, where the other two are more people-oriented. The influencing types are very people-oriented, very warm and friendly, and like people and need to be liked. And then the S's, again, are very caring, supportive people, stable, caring, and supportive people. So those are more people-oriented as opposed to results-oriented. They're more like to put people first. So the D's and the C's can actually get along just fine. And when you see them have a head-to-head, the thing is an employee, is to realize that those are just the two rams butting head. And it's okay. Let them go to it. And since they're the bosses, they can kind of just knock heads together and sort stuff out. They're not going to be bothered by that. That's not going to be a problem for them. The C's more so. The C's don't like it as much. The D's love it. They love a conflict. They thrive on conflict. So again, there might be some sort of volatile stuff going on. The thing for you in the midst of all this is to, I would stand back and let them thrash it out. And, be curious to see what your type is, looking at those. Let them duke it out, and then, you're off then to do the actual job. But let them come to a decision, and if they try to get you in the middle of it, maybe you can try to stay out of it. Or, if you are a good negotiator, the S's are good listeners. I said, well, yeah, but someone has a point of view, and you can kind of negotiate that if you want that role or if that's appropriate, which may or may not be, depending on the situation. But I think the main thing for you is not to take that personally. Just realize, you're going to have some clashes in there. There's two personality styles coming to a head, basically, and it's not really about you. So, you don't need to worry too much about that. I hope that helps a little bit. Sometimes it's realizing that we don't, it's not really about you and it's not personal, and you can kind of take a step back from it. One of the things I recommend is on our part of the, I was going to say this is, I wonder if I have it here, on my website at lifecoach.com, you can take something called the Emotional Index Quiz, and it's designed to raise your emotional intelligence. And if you can get your emotional needs met at home and from your friends and family, you won't be trying to get them met at work, which makes you immediately, you can go to work with a little bit more detachment and be a little bit more detached from all the emotions and the volatility that's going on around there. Because you're not taking it personally. You're getting your needs met elsewhere. You don't need to get appreciation. You don't need to get recognition. You don't need to get all these strokes at work to feel like you're a good person. It's nice to have those things, but if you get your needs met somewhere else from friends and family who actually care about you, you can go to work with a sort of a cooler detachment, and you'll actually be a much more effective employee. That's usually when people break through the glass ceiling. You don't need them. They want you. You're always more attractive. Any other questions? Should I whiz through some of these things we have for you guys? Career Change Coaching Kit, we can give you these assessments yourself. You can, if you're a manager, you might want to use these on your own team to see who your team is. We have a couple of very sophisticated computerized assessments that we use in corporations. Got a special deal for folks who are interested in coaching. We have an online coaching program as well as doing one-on-one personal coaching, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. If you have any questions at all, feel free to contact me at info@lifecoach.com. And we'll be happy to get back to you and help you in any way that we can. And of course, I do hope you come with more questions for part 2. Emma, are we out of time, or do we have time for one more question?
I think I have one last question, if that's okay, because I know that we're nearly close to our 1 hour slot. Last one is it's actually from Andrew. How do you overcome cultural differences Are there your theories applicable to Eastern cultures such as Japanese management?
Yeah, I think this works. I have a client actually in Japan, and working in a company in Tokyo, and these principles are pretty much human ones and work. There may be some slight cultural differences that you need to attend to, but most people are pretty much the same, and these strategies will work for everybody. I know we also had a question about somebody who said, I don't actually respect my boss. Does that make a difference in terms of the strategies? No, these are just basic communication strategies, and whether you respect your boss or not, you can still use the same tools. Delete the I's, get your emotional needs met so you're not taking things personally at work. And I have to apologize, there's a window washer outside washing the office windows right now. That's that weird noise if you hear that. And you're not taking things personally is the key thing, because when we take things personally, we get emotional about it, we get all upset about it, and it's a big waste of energy. And so if you can do that pace, you're going to be feeling better at work, because you're not going to try to get your needs met from your manager or your colleagues. And you won't, you'll be able to kind of, that cool detachment is really, really effective. You can be excited about what you're doing, but not be too worried about all the kind of the politics and the emotions and the stuff that's going on around there. So building relationships with people, if you're working in different offices, you may need to make a bigger effort. With questions about visibility, if you're not in the same office, again, you're going to need to do sending them a report or an online timesheet of your, not timesheet, but those calendars showing your project calendars. Show them that, go over that with them by phone, talk that through with them, have those weekly meetings with your boss so that they can see what you're accomplishing and what you're doing, and of course call them the moment there's any problems with anything, so that they trust you and say, okay, well, yeah, this person will immediately inform me if there's something that's going wrong. All right, so you can build out, it doesn't actually matter working by phone, as long as you're in, it's all about communication. It doesn't really matter if they're face-to-face or if they're face-to-face is always probably the easiest and most ideal for most people. But don't worry about that. Use Skype, use technology, use conference calls, use your internet, do shared documents. You can do everything virtually now. And you can have great working relationships with people that you've never actually seen in person. And you can really do that. In fact, one of my coaches in my company, I've never met her, and I would trust her with my children, my credit cards, and my life. I've never seen her in person. So you can actually have fantastical, profound, wonderful relationships with people that you've never seen.
Great. Thanks again, everyone.